You should have watched the last video for an introduction on angles on the coordinate plane and the coordinate plane, in case you don't remember it. So now we're going to talk about reference angles and how all this relates to SOHCAHTOA and everything like that. So definition real quick, or here's what a reference angle is. Reference angle. The reference angle is an angle between the terminal side and the x-axis. So angle between the terminal side and x-axis. Y'all remember the x-axis is like the flat horizontal one, not the y-axis. Okay, so reference angle, if we're in quadrant 1 and we just have some random angle here in quadrant 1, the reference angle and that angle, the most basic angle you see, is the same thing. So between my terminal side and my x-axis, this is my reference angle. If we're in quadrant 2, so this is our normal angle, but the reference angle is between the terminal side and the x-axis. So this is your reference angle. Even though, remember, angles are supposed to start here and open up, reference angles are different. They can kind of start wherever you need them to. Similar idea if we're in, so this would be a third quadrant angle, start at your positive x-axis and open up. The reference angle would be between your terminal side and your x-axis. So this piece right here is my reference angle. And then similar idea, if we're in the fourth quadrant, if we have some random angle here that comes, all the way around, or even if it opened negatively down, it doesn't matter. But the reference angle is between your terminal side and your x-axis. So this is your reference angle. Two things about your reference angle that just may help you is it's always positive and it's always less than 90 degrees. Okay. Why do you care? Because I'm going to ask you to find what is sine of this angle right here. And you can use reference angles to draw yourself a triangle. SOHCAHTOA that. Or same thing here. I could ask you what is cosine of this angle right here. Well, use your reference angle to make a triangle and SOHCAHTOA this. So that's what we're going to be doing. Let's write that down real quick though in case you need a reminder later on if you're looking back at your notes. Sine of whatever my regular angle is going to be the same thing as sine of my reference angle. So I can draw these triangles that I drew in SOHCAHTOA to figure out what sine and cosine are. I don't have to try and use this weird looped around curve here and do something about that with sine. The only thing you need to know is that the sign, like positive, negative, may be different though. So they're going to have the same fraction, the same number, but one could be positive or one could be negative. And then this is true for all 6 trig functions. It's not just sine and cosine, it's for everything. Okay. All right, so before we do our 3 examples, let's talk about when is sine positive, when is cosine positive, in which of your quadrants. So, luckily there's a really quick way or easy way for you to remember this. So here's our coordinate system again. Sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, cotangent. All 6 are positive here. So where is each trig function positive? So all of them are positive in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, only sine and cosecant. Remember, it's reciprocal or positive. The other four, cosine, tangent, secant, and cotangent, are negative. Here, if I choose an angle that's in the third quadrant here, tangent would give you a positive answer and cotangent would give you a positive answer. But sine and cosecant and cosine and secant would give you negatives. And then if I have an angle here from the fourth quadrant, cosine is positive or secant is positive, but the other four are not. So how do you remember that? You need to remember, like, if I tell you, oh, we're in quadrant 2, you should, by the time you take your test, immediately think, oh, then that means sine is positive. Everything, sine and cosecant are positive. All the others are negative. So think about it as A, S, T, C, because remember 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going counterclockwise. So all students take calculus, which isn't true, but I don't know where this came from, but it's a good way to help you remember. So all of them are positive here. S, just sine and its reciprocal or positive here. T, just tangent and its reciprocal or positive here. And then C, just cosine and its reciprocal or positive here. So remember that to help you figure out the pieces. And then one last reminder before we do our examples. You should eventually have these memorized: sine of 30 degrees, sine of 45 degrees, and sine of 60 degrees. Same thing for cosine. Hopefully, as I'm writing this, you're already thinking ahead to try and fill them in because you have already memorized them. So, okay. Remember for sine, or all of these, they're all written over 2. And you can either use the hand tricks to try and fill it in or just think sine counts up and square root, but square root 1. And cosine counts down. And imaginary square root. Okay, so memorize this, memorize this. Let's go. All right, so first example of these. Find the reference angle for 300 and then use that to find the exact value for sine of 300. I'm going to call this example 3, just using our last notes. So part A, find the reference angle for 300 degrees. And then for part B, give the exact value of sine 300. All right, so for part A, find the reference angle for 300. So you don't have to draw a picture, but it helps me, so I'm going to do it my way. All right, so remember everything starts here on the positive x-axis. It opens up, so 90, 180, 270, and it doesn't quite get all the way around to 360, so that means 300 is going to be somewhere here. This is 300. The reference angle, once I draw my picture, it helps me figure out reference angle. Remember, reference angle is between my terminal side and my x-axis. So that means this piece right here is my reference angle. How do I figure out what that number is? Well, hopefully you remember that a full circle is 360 degrees. So that means if this outside, like Pac-Man face right here is 300, this has to be 60 degrees because this full thing makes a full, or both of these together make a full circle. So the Pac-Man plus his mouth is a full circle. If Pac-Man is 300, that means my reference is 60. So you just kind of have to think about it that way. In the fourth quadrant, you subtract from 360. I don't even know where my notes are from before. So, sorry. Okay. So 360 minus my regular angle gives me my reference angle in the fourth quadrant. You can memorize that or just think through it. So my answer here is 60 degrees. I'm done. That's my reference angle. That's a degree symbol. And that's 0. Okay. Now give the exact value of sine 300. Before I wrote down, and I just took that away, sine of 300 is going to be the same thing as sine of 60 because 300 has a reference angle of 60. So that's going to be nice. Is the same thing as sine of 60, and you should have memorized. Hopefully you can see these, that sine of 60 is square root 3 over 2. But is that going to be a positive square root 3 over 2 or a negative square root 3 over 2? And it does matter. I will take off if you have the wrong sign. So here's what we do. Oh, I'll just look back up here. All students take calculus. So in the fourth quadrant, I'll write this out just so if you need something to study. In the fourth quadrant, only cosine and its reciprocal secant are positive. So this is sine, not cosine or secant. So that means that this is going to be, so sine of 300 is negative. So in the fourth quadrant, which is where our picture is, oh, you can't see any of that. In the fourth quadrant, only cosine and its reciprocal should be positive. So that means by default, sine has to be negative. Done. Okay, so it helps me to draw my picture so I can figure out which quadrant I'm in and figure out where my reference angle is. Add or subtract whatever you need to do to figure out what that exact number is. So then sine of your original one is going to be equal to sine of your reference angle. You should have this value, this fraction memorized by the time you take your test. Then use all students take calculus to figure out whether this is a positive fraction or a negative fraction. You can also double check your answer. So if you use your calculator, hopefully you can see this. If I did sine of 300, it's giving me a negative value. So you can also type that in and say, oh, it's supposed to be negative, so there we go, negative. And then notice sine of 60, which is my reference angle, it's the same number, it's just positive. This is not an exact answer because you'd have to round. Remember, exact answers are these. Okay, let's do 2 more of those and then we'll be done. Then I'll figure out what kind of practice you need to do. All right, so example 4. Find the reference angle and exact value for cosine 225. Okay, find the reference angle and exact value for cosine 225. So it helps me to draw a picture. Angles start here, and this is positive. I'm pretty sure, oh, no, the next example is negative. Okay, so this is positive, so I'm going to open up 90, 180. If I open all the way here, I'd get to 270, which I don't want to get that far. So 225 is going to be somewhere around here between my 180 and my 270. So 225. So I need to find the reference angle. Remember, your reference angle is between your terminal side and your x-axis. So this extra little slice right here is my reference angle. How do I find that? Notice I'll have a perfect semicircle, which is 180, plus that extra slice gives me my 225. So the full 225 degrees, if I subtract this top semicircle, it'll give me what's left over that extra slice, which is 45. This is quadrant 3. So here you do theta minus 180 to get your reference angle. This is back on the very first page, if you just want to like remind yourself. All right, so answer to my first question, reference angle is 45 degrees. All right, now let's say cosine 225 is going to be the same thing as cosine of 45. You should have that memorized. Cosine of 45 is square root 2 over 2, so that means this is square root 2 over 2. But is it a positive angle or is it a positive fraction or is it a negative fraction? All students take calculus. We are here in the third quadrant, so only tan and its reciprocal cotan are positive in the third quadrant. So this is not tan or cotan, so by default that means it's got to be negative. You can also double check your answer if you want to by saying tan of, oh, we're not doing tan, cosine of 225 and cosine of 45. Make sure you have the same number, and then this will tell you that you need to have a negative. Done. Okay, let's do one last one. Oh, and then read D2L for further examples or further instructions. Okay, example 5, last one. Find the reference angle and exact value for sine of negative 210. Find the reference angle and exact value for sine of negative 210. All right, so I'm going to draw my picture. Angles start here and they open down, so this is going to be opening down 90, 180, and if it opens all the way here, it'd be negative 270. So I'm not quite there, so I'm going to be somewhere here. My reference angle is between my terminal side and my x-axis. So my reference angle is this little slice right here. Normally, for positive angles, which is what we're mostly going to deal with, you would say 180 in quadrant 2. You would say 180 minus theta gives me my reference angle. But in this case, because it's a negative angle, you have to think through it like we did the last ones. So this full thing is 210. So 210 is made up of my reference angle, this slice, and this bottom semicircle. So if I take 210 and subtract this slice, which would be 180, it'll tell me what's left over to be that slice. So 210 is made up of 180 and this, which is 30 degrees. Your reference angle is always positive, so even though this is opening down, I just ignore the fact that these are negatives and just kind of deal with, okay, this full 210, even though it's opening down, minus that 180 gives me my reference angle. So remember, this should be positive regardless of which way you open. Okay, and then sine of negative 210 is going to be the same thing as sine of positive 30, which you should have memorized. Sine of positive 30, can you see that, is 1/2. This one you could type into your calculator and get, but that's not always the case. Is it going to be positive or negative? All students take calculus. We're here in the second quadrant, so sine and its reciprocal cosecant are positive in the second quadrant. This is sine. So yay, finally, we have a positive fraction. You can always double check. This one's nice because it's actually going to work out the way we want it to. Type in sine of negative 210 and type in sine of 30. They're both positive 1/2. Perfect.